There is a lake buried under Antarctica right now. It has been sealed off from the rest of the world for 15 million years. It is bigger than some small countries. And when scientists finally drilled down and touched its water for the first time, they found something that made headlines everywhere. But here's the strange part. Nobody knew this lake even existed until just a few decades ago. And once they found it, they realized it was not alone. There could be hundreds more lakes hiding down there. Some of them might even be connected, like an underground river system running beneath a continent everyone thought was just a giant block of ice. So how do you find a lake that no human has ever seen, buried under 2 miles of solid ice? And what do you do once you find it? Do you just drill a hole and hope for the best? What if something goes wrong? What if something is actually living down there? Stick around, because by the end of this video you will know exactly how scientists cracked open one of the last truly unknown places on Earth, and what they found waiting for them in the dark. A continent that is hiding something big. Let's start with a simple fact that sounds fake but is completely true. Antarctica is technically a desert, not the sandy kind, the driest kind. It barely ever snows there. In some spots, it only gets a couple inches of new snow every single year. So if you dug down through the snow under your boots, the flakes a few feet below, you could be over 10 years old. That seems strange, right? A place covered in ice but barely getting any new snow? Here is why that matters. If snow barely falls, but the ice keeps getting thicker and thicker over thousands and thousands of years, that means this ice has been quietly building up for a very, very long time. And it is thick, not just a little thick. If you could somehow pull a single column of that ice straight up and stand it next to the tallest building on Earth, you would need to stack 6 of those buildings on top of each other just to match it. That is how deep this ice goes in some places. Nearly as tall as Mount Kilimanjaro, just made of frozen water instead of rock. Now, here is where it gets weird. If Antarctica is basically a giant deep freezer that barely gets fresh snow, where did all that ice even come from? The answer is time. Layer after layer, year after year, snow falls, gets squeezed down and turns into ice. It has been happening for so long that if you drilled down through it, you would basically be drilling through a timeline of Earth's entire history. We are talking hundreds of thousands of years packed into solid ice, layer by layer, like the world's slowest, coldest history book. And that book has secrets in it. For decades, scientists have used planes and satellites to look underneath all that ice, and what they found was shocking. Antarctica is not just flat land buried under snow. There is a canyon down there deeper than the Grand Canyon. There is a hidden mountain range that could go toe-to-toe with the Alps. Scientists even believe there is proof of a massive space rock slamming into the continent long ago, along with one of the biggest clusters of volcanoes on the entire planet. So this whole time, while everyone thought Antarctica was just a boring sheet of white nothing, it was actually hiding entire mountain ranges, ancient impact zones, and ash from volcanoes nobody even knew were there. But in the late 1960s, while flying planes with special equipment over the ice, scientists spotted something that did not look like a mountain or canyon or crater. It was something flatter, something smoother, something that looked almost like it should not be there at all. Nobody knew what it was yet. But it would take decades of digging, both literally and scientifically, to figure it out. And once they did, it completely changed how we think about this frozen continent. Before we get into that part, do me a favor and hit subscribe. Not just because it helps the channel, but because the next part of this story involves a giant drill, a genuinely terrifying moment where scientists almost caused an accidental explosion under 2 miles of ice, and the discovery of actual living creatures that had never once seen sunlight. You do not want to miss where this goes. Drilling through time itself. So let's say you wanted to drill straight down through Antarctica to find out what that strange flat spot really was. What would that even look like? At first you would be drilling through soft, powdery snow, but the deeper you go, that snow starts changing. It gets packed down, squeezed by the weight of everything above it, until it turns into something scientists call firn. Firn looks kind of like a frozen sponge. It is the halfway point between snow and solid ice. Keep drilling, and eventually that sponge gets squeezed so tight that all the air pockets inside get trapped and sealed shut. That is a huge deal, because those trapped air bubbles are basically tiny time capsules. They hold actual samples of the air from whatever year that layer of snow fell. So when scientists pull up a long tube of ice called an ice core, they are pulling up a frozen diary of the planet's entire atmosphere, going back further than any written record humans have ever kept. If you held one of these ice cores up to the light, you would actually be able to see lines running through it, kind of like the rings inside a tree trunk. Ice that forms in the winter looks different from ice that forms in the summer, so every single line represents 1 year passing by. Scientists can literally count backward through history this way. They can point to a line and say, this is the year the Roman Empire was falling apart. This is the year farming was first invented. This is around the time the last Neanderthals were alive. And sometimes, in the middle of all those neat little yearly lines, You get one dark, ugly streak that stands out from everything else. That streak is ash. It means a volcano exploded somewhere on the planet, sometimes over 20,000 years ago. A piece of that eruption drifted all the way down to Antarctica and got frozen in place forever. One team of scientists actually managed to pull up an ice core that stretches back 1.3 million years. They have not even finished studying it yet, but once they do, it will be the longest, most detailed climate record humans have ever gotten our hands on. Just sitting there in a lab right now, waiting to be read like the oldest book on Earth. But drilling this deep is not simple or safe. As all that snow and ice piles up, it does not just sit still, it slowly slides across the land underneath it, like a giant frozen conveyor belt creeping toward the ocean. As it stretches and bends over uneven ground, cracks form. Some of those cracks are small. Others open up into massive hidden crevasses, deep enough to swallow a person whole and often completely invisible from the surface because a thin layer of snow blows over the top and hides them. Walking near one of these cracks is nerve-wracking enough. Driving heavy equipment over the ground above one is even scarier because you genuinely do not know it is there until it is right underneath you. To avoid falling into one of these hidden traps and to figure out what is buried far below, scientists have gotten creative over the years. Back in the 1950s, they used to set off small explosions on the surface and study how the shock waves bounced back through the ice, kind of like a doctor tapping on your knee to test your reflexes. These days, they use satellites that bounce lasers off the surface of the ice, and any weird bumps or dips hint at something unusual happening deep underneath. On top of that, planes fly back and forth across the whole continent using radar that can basically see straight through solid ice, mapping out everything hidden below like an X-ray of the entire landmass. vidIQ. Using all of that information together, layer by layer, mountain by mountain, crack by crack, scientists slowly built a full picture of what was hiding underneath Antarctica's ice. And that strange, flat spot spotted decades earlier, it kept showing up again and again in the data. Something about it did not behave like solid ground at all. To understand what that spot really was, we have to go back to a group of scientists who had already been drilling in that exact location for years, without even realizing what they were about to find. The lake that should not exist. Back in 1970, a team of Soviet scientists picked a spot in Antarctica and started drilling straight down. They kept going for year after year after year. This was not a quick project. It took them nearly 3 decades of steady drilling before they finally hit something almost 4 kilometers below the surface. And when they did, they stopped immediately because what they found should not have been possible. Liquid water. Not ice, not frozen ground. Actual liquid water, sitting there under nearly 4 kilometers of solid ice, completely sealed off from sunlight, fresh air, and the rest of the planet for around 15 million years. That instantly raises a huge question. If the surface of Antarctica is one of the coldest places on Earth, how could there possibly be liquid water hiding underneath it instead of just more ice? It comes down to 2 things working together. First, all that ice above acts like an enormous blanket. Heat, naturally rising up from deep inside the Earth, gets trapped underneath it instead of escaping, slowly warming the rock and water below. Second, and this part surprises most people, water can actually stay liquid at colder temperatures when it is under extreme pressure. And down there, with kilometers of solid ice pressing down from above, the pressure is roughly 350 times stronger than what you feel standing at sea level. That crushing weight is enough to keep the water from freezing solid, even though it sits right underneath one of the coldest places on the planet. This hidden body of water eventually got a name, Lake Vostok. And it is not some small puddle. By volume, it ranks as one of the largest lakes on the entire planet, similar in size to Lake Ontario, one of the Great Lakes in North America. Once scientists confirmed Lake Vostok was real, a much bigger question started forming. If something had been sealed away from sunlight, fresh air, and the surface world for 15 million years, could anything actually be alive down there? And if so, what would it even look like after evolving completely alone for that long, with zero contact with anything else on the planet? Scientists desperately wanted to know. But there was a serious problem standing in their way. Nobody had any idea what would happen the moment they actually broke through into the lake. Would the water come rushing up the drill hole with so much pressure behind it that it caused a dangerous blowout? Nobody could say for sure. One scientist compared the risk to something almost everyone has done by accident. Drop a piece of candy into a bottle of soda, and it does not just fizz a little, it explodes upward almost instantly. Now imagine that same kind of reaction, except instead of a soda bottle, it is a massive underground lake, trapped under insane amounts of pressure, and instead of a kitchen counter, it is happening at the bottom of a 4-kilometer hole in the ice. Figuring out how to safely break through without causing that kind of blowout took nearly 10 years of careful planning. While all of that was happening, something else was going on above the surface that made this discovery even bigger than anyone expected. Satellites tracking the ice noticed something bizarre. In certain spots, the surface of the ice sheet was actually rising and falling, sometimes by almost 10 meters. That is not something solid, frozen ground should ever do. When scientists looked closer, they realized Lake Vostok was not some rare, one-of-a-kind pocket of water. There were hundreds of other lakes hidden underneath the ice across the whole continent, and some of them were not just sitting there quietly. They were actively filling up and draining into each other, almost like a slow-motion plumbing system running beneath an entire continent that everyone thought was frozen solid all the way through. So this was never just about one secret lake. It was about an entire hidden world of water flowing underneath the ice, completely invisible from above. Here is where the story gets even more intense, because eventually someone had to actually drill that final hole and find out what was really inside, breaking through into the unknown. With Lake Vostok mapped out and the risks studied for years, the Russian team finally made their move. But their drill hole had a complication. To keep the hole from freezing shut while they worked, they had been filling it with a special fluid, similar to kerosene. Right before breaking through, they added another chemical on top of it that was heavier, hoping it would act like a plug and stop that kerosene from mixing into the lake the moment they broke through. Then they used a drill with a heated tip to slowly melt the last stretch of ice, separating them from the water below. The instant they broke through, the pressurized lake water shot upward with so much force that it rocketed more than 30 meters up the hole, blasting the kerosene and the other fluid completely out of the way. When they finally pulled up a sample of that ancient frozen water to study it, headlines around the world announced they had discovered a brand new type of bacteria, something never seen before on Earth. It sounded like the discovery of the century. But there was a problem. That bacteria looked suspiciously similar to bacteria that is commonly found living inside kerosene itself. In other words, the sample may have simply been contaminated by the drilling fluid, not actual ancient life from the lake. Because of that doubt, the Russian team never officially published their bacteria findings, and a lot of scientists around the world stayed skeptical about what had really been found. Meanwhile, other countries were trying a cleaner approach. Instead of using kerosene or any chemical fluid at all, teams from Britain and the United States switched to something completely different. Extremely hot, pressurized water that had been filtered and cleaned using ultraviolet light to kill off any contamination before it ever touched the ice. This boiling water blasted straight down, melting through the ice without leaving behind any messy chemicals that could confuse the results later. There was just one issue. This method used an enormous amount of fuel to keep the water hot enough. The British team, drilling into a different hidden lake, ran out of fuel partway through the project and had to abandon their attempt entirely. Other teams tried to help, but there simply was not enough fuel available to finish the job in time. That left one final team to keep pushing forward, drilling deeper and deeper day after day. Until finally, they broke through into their target lake completely clean with no contamination at all. The moment it happened, the whole team erupted into cheers. People who had spent years of their lives working toward this single instant finally got their answer. And their answer was yes, there was life down there. Not just a few stray bacteria either, an entire ecosystem full of thriving colonies of bacteria and tiny organisms that had been living and surviving in complete darkness with no sunlight at all for who knows how long. A few years later, in 2018, a different team managed to break through into another hidden lake. And this time, they collected samples of the mud and sediment sitting at the very bottom, not just the water itself. What they found inside that mud turned out to be even stranger. Certain viruses discovered in that sample appeared to be genuinely new, types of viruses that specifically infect bacteria rather than humans, unlike anything scientists had cataloged before. To be clear, these are not viruses that can infect people. They only target bacteria. So there's no need to worry about anything escaping up through that drill hole and causing problems anywhere else. Scientists have not spotted any larger creatures swimming around down there. Cameras sent into these lakes on small underwater robots have not picked up anything bigger than microscopic life so far. But the microscopic life that is down there might be more important than anyone originally expected. Why this matters. Way beyond Antarctica. Here's the part that turns this whole story from a cool discovery into something genuinely mind-blowing. Antarctica has not always looked the way it looks today. Millions of years ago, before all this ice built up, parts of the continent may have looked completely different, maybe even ice-free in certain eras. That means the strange new life scientists are finding trapped under the ice today might not actually be brand new life at all. It could be extremely old life, organisms that have simply been sealed away and preserved this entire time, quietly surviving underneath the ice while the rest of the planet changed completely above them. And that idea leads somewhere even bigger. If life can survive, locked away in complete darkness, crushed under massive pressure, with no sunlight, no fresh air, and freezing temperatures for millions of years, that changes what scientists think is possible elsewhere in the universe. Several icy moons orbiting other planets in our solar system are believed to have similar conditions. Thick shells of ice covering deep, dark oceans underneath. Scientists studying Antarctica's hidden lakes are essentially using this frozen continent as a practice run for exploring those distant, icy worlds someday. The exact same drilling methods and the same careful decontamination techniques used to avoid ruining samples here on Earth are being studied specifically to prepare for future missions to search for life out there. So finding living organisms buried under Antarctica's ice does not just answer a question about Earth. It gives scientists real hope that life could be hiding on other worlds too, just waiting under a shell of ice somewhere out in space. And here is the truly wild part. Out of the hundreds of hidden lakes scientists have mapped underneath Antarctica so far, only a small handful have actually been explored. The rest are still sitting down there completely untouched, sealed away in total darkness, waiting for someone to finally find out what is inside. If you made it this far, hit like on this video and subscribe if you have not already, and turn on notifications so you do not miss what is coming next. We are working on a full video about what really happened to the ozone layer above Antarctica, and honestly, it gets just as wild as this story did. So here's a question for you. If scientists eventually find a much bigger, much stranger creature hiding in one of these untouched lakes someday, do you think we should keep exploring? Or is there such a thing as digging too deep into a place that has been sealed off for millions of years? Let me know what you think in the comments.